All right, so let's take a look at a cool monster that is really fun to run, but which is really simple. So something that's great to start with at fairly low levels of play, um, fairly easy to run, and is fun, and that's the Ettin. So let's start by looking at my adventure encounters and monster design tool to see kind of how we can use this in fights. And if you put in CR1 and have 6 characters, an Ettin is at CR4 is too strong a fight. At level 2, 6 level 2 characters can handle an Ettin, but it is a high challenge. And if we look at the experience points, you see it's 1100. It's very close to the 1200, which is the max for high. This gets better if we go to 3rd level. We can see there that's a moderate challenge with a little bit below a nice safe margin before it would max out the moderate level. And in fact, we are not supposed to go over that max, so that gives us a good feel for it. We're safely in that moderate zone. So really, we're looking at levels 2 as a really hard challenge. We're looking at 3 as a moderate. If we have 6 characters and we go to level 4, it becomes a low challenge. So it's just a few CRs there where it's working really well. Now, if you have a few fewer characters and so on, this changes a bit. And again, you can run this whole tool to see that. And that is a fight that I always really love because it has this really cool feature of 2 heads. I was on a show quite some time ago with Mike Shea on his show, and I talked about an Ettin example, right, of like making an encounter idea, and the idea of 2 heads arguing. You can see it in Monty Python. There are other examples like that, but it's just this kind of classic concept of the Ettin could have conflicting goals. It could be, saying different things to you. It's a really fun thing to play around with. One of them could be asleep initially, right? So it could be a little different. There are a lot of ways you can play with an Ettin to be cool. That doesn't have to be just a fight, or can be an interesting type of fight. At higher levels, you could also have the Ettin be surrounded with a bunch of other creatures, and maybe in some kind of a dynamic of role playing that encourages options other than combat. Like maybe there are goblins and hobgoblins, and the one head plays favorites with one versus the other. Maybe the characters can turn them against it, right? That could be really interesting, right? Or even win one of the 2 heads over so that it doesn't fight as effectively against you. A lot that you can do here with just the very concept we have here. But let's look at what it tells us about the lore. So Ettins are giants. They're physically powerful, 2 heads. Some of them are similar to hill giants, and this is kind of cool. Others are more bestial, have more bestial or unusual traits: tusks, short horns, a single eye on each head. So that's neat, the idea that an Ettin isn't just like hill giant, 2 heads. So cool. That's something you could play with too if you wanted to, that might fit some concept that you're going with in your encounters. They ally with other giants. They value strength. Some of them have mystical ties to lands they inhabit, so they can happen in Fey lands and things like that. And that is cool because it's a little unusual having it 2 heads. That actually can fit really well into a Fey atmosphere. Each head has a distinct personality, and it kind of describes some things I was talking about. They can function as a team, right? One's the leader and whatever. I always like the opposite, which is like one head's picking on the other, and then the players can maybe go, wait a minute, we like you. And that, I just think that's such a fun thing. We have interactions. The heads are amping at one another, keeping their back to the Gorgon, or otherwise act like they don't see the monster, criticizing another. So, some interesting capabilities here, and that's kind of all we get. You can find even more lore in the 2014 Monster Manual as well. It's often good to check and see what they have there. But they work in really neat ways, right? They're excellent as a leader to smaller things that can be killed easily, but again, which also maybe there's some role-playing potential to play off so that the players have a real fun time with this. Ettins, because of their stature, work well in situations where the players might be at different height levels, but still can hit it from wherever, but maybe get some cover against the Ettin. That can be kind of cool, right? Attack its feet while having some cover. You can deliberately put that in there, even at that, say, level 1 level, to where if most hits are missing, it might work, but we got to look at what the damage is, and we'll do that. But let's work through the stat block here before we get too far into our encounter design. It's large, it's chaotic evil, it has an armor class of 12. So 12, pretty easy to hit. Yes, you can miss it, but you will usually be hitting. It's also initiative -1. So the characters are going to drive how the encounter goes, and it is in a reacting position, right? Not just in initiative order, but also with its intelligence and wisdom, as we can see right here. Its charisma is also low, high strength, high con, low dex. So it has 85 hit points, which at low levels is a pretty nice pile of hit points. In fact, if I look at the monster statistics, see my last video where I went through all the math, I can look at the Forge of Foes and say that in that book, we would expect an average of 84 hit points and 28 points of damage per round being dealt, an armor class of around 14. So this has a lower armor class, and if I look at sort of the average for the 2024 Monster Manual, it tends to be around 71 hit points, a little lower than that, and the damage is around 29. And in the DMG, the hit points can be even higher. So this has actually lower hit points than that and a low armor class. But if you're running it, especially at the lower character levels, this will feel like more hit points than this, but they'll be able to hit it pretty well and bring it down. Now, what it has also here, it's very good at perception. 2 heads, right? Immune to a number of conditions, including blind and charm and deafen, right? Things that come from its 2 heads, frightened, stunned, and conscious. Okay, cool. So the major kind of immunities like that, those conditions that really take you out are seldom going to work on it. I like to just highlight those, quickly focus on them before a fight. Gear, it has gear listing, so it has a battle axe and a morning star, meaning that if that can be taken away from it, it could impact it, and also it will be left behind as gear that the characters can use. Dark vision, you can see in the dark, so that's a fun idea for the encounter to go into a dark vision mode. Speaks giant, not common, so it will be speaking out in giant to everybody, which if the encounter interactions are important, I would just have it no common. So that way it can do that. Or for more fun, one of the both heads speak giant, one of them speaks common, one speaks, some other language that'd be useful to some of the party. That could be fun, right? The 2 parts of a puzzle thing where the elf in the party can say, oh, wait a minute, it does know where, the thing we're looking for is, or something like that. That could be neat. So its attack block is really easy, right? This is not a legendary monster. It doesn't have reactions. It doesn't have bonus actions. So it's a nice monster to threaten a party with when we are a fairly new DM or it's a low level encounter. There's just a few things you need to worry about. The Ettin is making 1 battle attack and 1 morning star attack with its multi-attack. It doesn't tell us we can choose, so it's doing 1 of each. So the tactics will be pretty simple because of that, right? The battle axe +7 to hit, same thing for the morning star. That's good because we don't want to worry about it. And in fact, they both do 14 damage, but they're different types. Battle axe is slashing, and if it's a large or smaller creature, it's prone. No save, it's knocked prone. The morning star is piercing damage, and the target has disadvantage on the next attack roll it makes. So really simple tactics. You'll probably want to do them in the order listed, because if you knock someone prone, and then you get advantage to attack them with the morning star, and if you hit, they will have disadvantage in the next attack roll, even if they stand up. Cool, simple, effective. That's what it's going to do. There's no reason to alter the order. It doesn't make it clear here whether it can do it in either order, but even if it can, going prone is always going to be better. If it got to choose, there could be situations when it could say, hey, I want to knock 2 creatures prone, or I want to give 2 creatures disadvantage, but that's not what it says here. Now, you could choose to change that for your particular monster. That could be cool for sort of alternate, but tactics-wise here, it's doing 1 and then the other, right? We don't have to worry about anything else. All we got to do is just track this. So, if you're using miniatures, knock the mini prone, easy to track. If you are using Theater of the Mind, maybe have a token that you give out and say, you're prone. So we remember it because that's what's going on in this encounter. It's a big part of it. Same thing with disadvantage, but here you probably want a little token that either you put next to the mini or you pass out to the player for that next attack roll. When you make your next attack roll, give this back to me, but you've got disadvantage on that first one. So very simple tactics. a lot of what this monster will bring is what else you add to it, right? The prone and disadvantage will make it a little interesting because different things are happening in what it's doing, and you can think through how it wants to break up its attacks. But realistically, it probably just wants to focus on whatever's annoying it the most. Not get prone, and whatever's damaging the most, because you will not get prone and then have a high chance of imposing disadvantage on it. And then that means that thing that was annoying it will be less likely to hit it and continue that. It does not attack with reach or anything like that, even though it's a giant. So if you want to say go after the wizard, and that means provoking attack of opportunity, that's a fun thing you can do. And hey, maybe one of the heads would want to do that. The other head might try to talk out of it and then provoke opportunity attacks. That can be a really fun thing to do in a battle, right? They're disagreeing on tactics. But otherwise, it's pretty simple. Do I like this monster? Yeah, I mean, because it's less here about being super effective. You just want the math to be enough of a challenge, and then it's about everything else you're bringing to it, right? The personalities you're hamming up, the concept of these two heads and what they're doing. If there are any other monsters, how they're interplaying with them. In terms of the setup for this, I started talking about this a little bit here, but it doesn't need to move a whole lot. It's got a speed of 40 feet, so it is pretty quick. If it needs to get around the battlefield and provoke, it can do so, right? It's not necessarily afraid of doing that, especially if it wants to, say, knock someone prone, move away from it to provoke at disadvantage because it's prone, and go after, say, the wizard, who's maybe attacking it with spells that require rolling to hit, and hit it with this Morning Star to give it disadvantage and be up in its face. That could be kind of fun, right? That's neat. So you might think of a terrain, when I think of something like an Ettin, it could just be like in that traditional cave with some room to move around. I mean, it's a large square, so you always got to think about large mini needs a little extra space, and then 6 characters, so they're not all bunched up. But I like, especially with Ettins and with any kind of giant, a little verticality. So having like a ramp, whether it's an earthen ramp, things to jump onto, things that provide cover, that I find works really well to create the kind of giant encounter where you think of where people are hiding underneath, like I was talking about earlier, attacking at the feet. That kind of thing is really cool to do. Giving the giant something to topple, or even that they can topple on the giant, can be cool, right? So you could describe something as being precarious, like maybe it's against a ledge. There's a tree that's leaning against another, and it could knock it down. Could be really cool, or that they could knock it on it, right? That kind of thing can be really fun to add in something like a giant fight, an Ettin fight. Otherwise, it's really about what other combatants. So if you're running this at a higher CR, or running for higher level PCs, and the CR4 is part of it, then where you're going to put all of little squads of things, right? Here's where you might want to do something like have something that's a little bit strong at a range, like maybe even, there's a set of 3 goblins that are hunkered down at the top of a ramp, firing from cover. So if you don't deal with them, they're just sitting there pinging you, right? That might be worth some characters breaking off there. You don't want to spend forever to get to them, but going after them at range to break up that range brigade, while another part of the party focuses on the Ettin, and that helps the Ettin survive longer, right? Just a simple bit like that can be really nice tactical breakup. And so I think about that, and it's not hard to run, right? Just running something like goblins and an Ettin, pretty simple to use, and it still ends up being really fun with that personality and the potential, if you want there to be some ways that they might want to talk the goblins into it, right? You could have them arguing with the one head and the other head apologizing, and the players will probably jump in on that. So just think through what those factors are, the one head versus the other, or if it really is just totally working effectively together. Make it so it's interesting and fun. An Ettin's fun when the players talk back or scheme, and that's what I would shoot for, is something that's going to create that in your play. I'm really appreciative of all the folks who've supported me on Patreon, and that's led to conversations about the Adventure Encounter monster design tools. And so I want to actually use that and show a little more here of not just having a solo encounter with an Ettin, but also some variations on Ettin encounters that you could do if you use lower CR creatures along with that Ettin. So an Ettin is a high challenge, as we said before, for 6 level 2 characters, right? Moderate if they're level 3, and if they're level 4 characters, it becomes low. So that's kind of the range as a solo fight. But we might say, hey, let's go with 4 characters as our size of the party. Kind of more typical. We might have 4 to 5 PCs. And for 4 level 3 PCs, that Ettin is now a high challenge. Right? It was moderate when you had 6 characters, but when you have just 4 characters, it's a high challenge for level 3. Moderate if you have 4 level 4 characters, and then low if they go up to 5th level. And now with that kind of separation of being at level 5 and having a low challenge, this is where we can then add in more monsters to the mix, right? Similarly, if we went back to having 6 characters, we could have 6 level 4 characters we can add to the mix. So you can kind of do that, right? If it's a low challenge, then add monsters to get back up to a higher level of challenge that you might want. And you've now created a different dynamic. And in the Forge of Foes book, we went ahead and created tables for you that have combinations of monsters that hit kind of common concepts, like a boss and 2 monsters that support it, or a boss and 3 or 4 underlings. Even a boss, 2 lieutenants that are sort of the sub-bosses, and then 8 minions that are really easy to kill. And these kinds of concepts are very fun in encounters. Both they create a narrative dynamic and a combat dynamic that's very fun and fluid with a lot more options than just that one boss. That's not to take away from a boss encounter. A boss where it's just the one boss can also be a lot of fun. But those common dynamics, we give you that in Forge of Foes. And let's kind of take a look at it here on this encounter spreadsheet with some options here. So we can, and if you look at this first encounter that I have here, you can see it where we've got an Ettin plus the idea of 2 other monsters that are with it, that are kind of underlings that it's pushing around, or instructing, leading, depending on the narrative you want to tell. And you can see that if we have 3 CR2 monsters, it becomes a moderate challenge. And you could use 2 as well, which ends up being on the upper threshold of low. And this is all in the 2024 math here. If you were in the 2014 math, you'd want to use just 2 of those CR2. I think it's going to take some time for folks to work through sort of the differences of all the things that have changed between 2014 and 2024. I'm personally still watching people play at conventions and all kinds of other things before I'm going to be ready to say, this is hard or properly hard or not. But we can just go off of our expectations here of, in general, these 2 to 3 CR2 creatures will probably represent a pretty good battle alongside the Ettin. So what is a CR2 creature? And we can look at the 2025 Monster Manual to see what the options are. Some CR2 options are the Bandit Captain, the Berserker, the Cultist Fanatic, which, by the way, the Orc Priest of Grumsh, that's sort of what they say is a Cultist Fanatic if you wanted to convert it. It's not really a conversion, but you could, reroute that to there. So the Cultist Fanatic, the Druid, the Ogre, the Priest, and the Quaggoth all stood out as kind of neat concepts. There are other CR2s as well, and especially if you go into all the other books, but from the 2024, 2025 Monster Manual, these work pretty well. I particularly like the Berserker. That kind of, to me, goes along with this idea of the Ettin. The Druid could be neat if you wanted to have like one Berserker, one Druid. That could be an interesting dynamic, but it might pull away from the concept of the Ettin. I think the Ettin's so interesting that you maybe just want some sort of cool support monsters, but that they don't overshadow the Ettin. So I probably would just throw 2 Berserkers, and that would be pretty neat concept. And that Berserker stat block can work well to be whatever you want it to be. They could be, some sort of other humanoid that's interesting. It could be orcs or, any number of interesting things. For the concept of having even more monsters underneath it, like 3 or 4, that's where we can use CR1 creatures. And you can see here what the math looks like for CR1 creatures supporting that CR4 Ettin. Even 4 CR1 creatures under the 2024 math will provide a low challenge. Now here, this is right on the threshold between low and moderate. So it's pretty reasonable here to go with this, to go with 4. That's kind of just about moderate. Depending on what your party's like, you could then bring more in. You could even have them show up in waves. If it's too easy initially, bring a few more. But CR1 gives us a lot of neat options in terms of monsters that fit the concept well. Some of the CR1s are Bugbear Warrior, the Death Dog, the Dire Wolf, the Giant Hyena, the Goblin Boss, Ogrelon Ogre, which used to be called Half Ogres, Pirate, Spy. Those can all be really neat for dynamic fights, like, a Spy or Pirate will create a kind of neat battle. If you wanted sort of human opponents that the ogres are leading. But I would probably go with the Bugbear Warrior or the Dire Wolf. Those could both be really fun. And in fact, it could be really neat with talking about the Ettin and having the two heads. If one of the heads was like ordering the dire wolves to attack to their death, and the other one was like, oh no, my poor little dire wolves, and like taking care of them and wanting them to not, crying if they die. Like, that could be really fun dynamic that might cause the characters to think, wait a minute, what are we doing? Are we making this one Ettin sad? How do we feel about that? That could be really neat. And then the concept where you have an Ettin boss, 2 lieutenants or sub-bosses, and then 8 minions. In 2014, the level 5 characters, these, again, we're doing this all for 4 level 5 characters. It was really easy to end up with a fight that was way too hard. But with the 2024 changes to the encounter balance math, you can see we can actually end up with quite a number of these monsters and still have it be a moderate challenge. If we go back up to the top, moderate is tops out at 3,000. So anything between 2,000 and 3,000 is moderate. And so this is just over the low. So you actually still have a fair amount of room. Math is with 6 CR1 half creatures and 2 CR1s. You could actually have 8 in there and still be a moderate challenge, which is kind of amazing. And again, it's going to take a lot of people playing through this in lots of different tables to see how it works, because I'm sure I can make it work, but what is going to be best is going to take a while to figure out, and how many tables have problems with a particular band. That's going to take a long time for us to see. We've had 10 years of 5e 2014 experience that have made it really so that we can have a high level of knowledge and comfort with what we like. And we're just building that up now. But back to the subject at hand. We can have this Ettin with 2 CR1s. And again, that could be like your Bugbear Warriors or your Dire Wolves. And then you could have, and it's in this case, Bugbear Warriors would be good, right? That would be a nice kind of like sub-boss to the Ettins. And then you want a bunch of minions. So here we could have these 6 to 8 CR1 halves. And these can be some interesting things. We could have any of the Dust, Ice, or Magma methods, Null Warriors, Hobgoblin Warriors, Myconid Adults, which would be such a bizarre encounter concept, Rust Monsters, right? If everybody's using wooden weapons, and especially the Ettin, and then all of a sudden in come these Rust Monsters from a cave being, herded by a couple of Bugbear Warriors that have clubs, that would be super interesting. Satyr, if you had a Fey type encounter, the Scout, the Tough, which the Orc is sort of a Tough now. So you could do that as orcs. Wargs, if you want to keep with the kind of idea of like wargs maybe being led by dire wolves, right? That could be interesting. So really a lot of neat concepts here. And you can see how this just starts, at least for you. Hopefully it does what it does for me, which is I think this and start going, oh yeah, if we had the 2 dire wolves and a bunch of wargs, and so it's this kind of pack mentality and the kind of interesting storyline if that you had that one Ettin head that's really worried about their welfare and loves the animals, and the other one that's kind of abusing them and being mean to them. Like, that'd be a really neat concept. Or Bugbear Warriors and some Hobgoblin Warriors, and maybe one of the heads is very militaristic and the other one's like just trying to improvise, and the 2 heads are fighting over that. Or again, you could have the concept of one of the Ettin heads is really caring about everybody who gets wounded, and the other one is just seeing them as fodder, right? That would be really fun. It might make you think differently about how you want to act. It can be a lot of fun to have the creatures, like if you had a bunch of mephits that really resented the Ettin forcing them to work for it, right? And then you as characters, or the party that's taking on the Ettin, could make that decision of whether they want to try to do something on the role-playing side to maybe befriend the mephits and get that like nice Ettin head to convince the mean one to stop fighting, right? Or find some alternate way of solving things. An Ettin with Myconids would just be really, really hilarious. And then you have to think about maybe, I don't know, what would be the CR1 that goes with the CR1 half migrant adults, but that could be really neat to think through, right? And just, yeah, a lot of options there. So I hope this is neat to just look at not just the solo monster, but what Ettin plus other monsters would look like, and what kind of neat dynamics you can come off of that. So hope that makes sense. I'm not going to do this for the, if you saw the video on the Blob of Annihilation, to me that strikes me as a monster. It's really meant to feel like a solo. It would be kind of a little harder to fit other things in there. One last thing I want to add is monster powers. This is especially useful if the Ettin is a solo, or if your party is very strong. But they can also just be nice ways to add tactics and flavor for your Ettin. Forge of Foes has a bunch of monster powers that we worked on together, myself, and then Scott Fitzgerald Gray and Mike Shea, to create neat options that can enhance your monsters. And you just add them to the monster stat block. And as we said, that Ettin is really simple, right? So if we want a little more tactics, a little more interesting flavors, then it really tells us, hey, this is a giant, or this is, really, it's got two heads reacting to what you do. Then monster powers can really help with this. And there are a whole bunch of monster powers in Forge of Foes, but two that I would look at are the ones that are in the giant block. So we have monster power recommendations that are by monster type, and the giant one is Forceful Blow, which is a reaction with a recharge. And when the creature hits a target with a weapon, you roll 1d4 plus 1, and you multiply that by 5, and that's how many feet away from the Ettin you're pushed, right? So this is a way to make the Ettin really feel giant, right? Really feel strong and massive, because as it's hitting you, it's just sending you back. Because of the way the Ettin stat block is, I would probably have that first hit, or maybe what I would do is amend this to say it, may push that many feet away, because what I would probably do is you want to knock something prone, and you could even make some golf or baseball joke about how you're teeing it up or setting it up, and then you hit with your second attack and then send that creature flying, right? That'd be really funny. Or give it a hockey stick, whatever you like. That could be really neat. So Forceful Blow is just fantastic. Really communicates that sense of power in the monster, and just, giant scale, sending foes flying. Similarly, there's a giant themed power called Shove Allies, and this works really well if we have a bunch of those minions. So what you do as an action is the Ettin would shove any allied creatures who are within 5 feet of it and that are smaller than the Ettin. And each shoved ally moves up to 15 feet away from the Ettin, gets kind of chucked outwards, and then can make a melee weapon attack if they end their movement and within reach of a target. So the Ettin chucks out all those, hobgoblins or whatever is around them. They go flying, and when they end up next to a PC, they will attack that PC. And that gives you a lot of roleplay capability, right? To again show how this is a big giant, big boss, how it's maybe being a little bit mean to its underlings. A lot of fun flavor here with the giant powers. And the other block that I would look at is the bestial powers. These have a bunch of neat ones that I like to use with a number of different types of sort of cunning foes, or when they are big foes that you want to kind of feel their size. Earth-shaking demise is a trait where when the creature dies, normally would be huge or larger, which this is not, but it can still be fun. Topples to the ground when it dies, and any smaller creature within 20 feet of the Ettin would have to succeed on a strength saving throw, or be knocked prone. It's not a huge effect, right? But it just communicates story-wise, like this thing's huge. So in this case, because the Ettin is not quite an enormous giant, I might do this as being a something that's adjacent to it. So decrease that size down a bit. And we talk about in Forge of Foes, like the whole point of these monster powers is for you to customize them as well, right? We've given you a nice initial thing to use, but make it yours. And so I might do something like that. So when it dies, it just shows how massive it was through that power. And another one that I use all the time is Retaliation, which is a reaction. And that's that when the creature is hit by a creature that the Ettin can see, the Ettin can make an opportunity attack against the attacker. And so it's just a way to get some off-turn damage in, feel a little more dangerous, right? Because player will have their character go up and stab the Ettin. Well, now the Ettin hits you back. And with this being a two-headed creature, that makes a lot of sense that it would sort of, spin around. One of the heads sees you as you attack and it retaliates. Very easy to narrate. A lot of nice flavor to it. It feels right for an Ettin. And then just, you could always customize the underlings, though that makes it way more complicated to fight. But probably what I would really do is keep them simple, as I said, so that the Ettin really shines, and instead have them react story-wise, right? So they're cheering and they're, maybe cheering on the boss, or they're afraid of the boss and feel like they have to cheer, right? There's lots of ways you can role play that. So I hope that's been super fun to see these two monsters. I love monster tactics, so thinking through that concept of Ettins versus like all the way up to CR23, 19 CRs later, where you're facing a blob of annihilation and what that might feel like. Two very different encounters. I hope you've had ideas from this, and put some messages down below. Let me know what you think and what you would do with these encounter concepts. Love hearing from you. Thanks so much, and I'll see you next time.